Right. So now the present looks so insane from this perspective that you and I appear to share, right? Where we are now educating children ever younger in obsessing about defects of the system, many of them imaginary, right? Rather than giving them competence. In fact, we are demonizing the very acquisition of competence.
There, perfect. That's exact. So that's something that needs to be broadcast everywhere. I think that the pathology that's at the core of the culture war is an attack on competence itself. It's an attack on competence, the idea of competence as well. That's why the critiques of meritocracy emerge, or that's at least part of the motivation for that. And everyone, you can say, well, look, do you rise according to your merit? It's like partly, okay, partly. And corruption reduces the correlation. But to say partly and to admit to the existence of some corruption is not the same thing at all as to say merit itself is a corrupt idea.
Right.
That's a completely different set of propositions with completely different outcomes.
Totally agree. And so we are constantly in this battle where if we say anything in defense of the idea of merit or meritocracy, we are understood to have claimed that we live in a meritocracy, and what's more, a perfect one. And then this is used to remove any impulse towards the acquisition of capacity. And to do this to children is so
terrible. I mean, it's terrible.
Yes, it's
the worst of all possible things you can do to children, because you punish them for their virtues.
Right. You're not giving them brain damage. You're giving them mind damage. You're damaging their minds.
Well, I looked at what happened in Boston this week so a number of the schools for the gifted my understanding is, were closed down because of racial inequality in their makeup. And I thought, well, it's obviously an undesirable, it's obviously problematic. But why should I assume that the motives of those who shut down the gifted system is the remediation of racism rather than an assault on the gifted? Because it's them that suffer immediately for it.
Right.
Now, maybe that's unfair, but I can't help but think that what we are seeing in the guise of virtue is an assault on the idea, an assault on competence. The thing is, competence presupposes value, and value presupposes a hierarchy. So if you admit to competence, you admit to a value hierarchy and differential ability. And that flies in the face of equality. So
I completely agree. And the obvious answer, of course, is irrespective of how unfair the system is, you should invest in your own competence. You should make use of what tools you have. And then we collectively ought to democratize the tools as well as we can.
Yes.
Because society is clearly best, and it is the morally only acceptable thing for everyone to have.
Well, it's even the only self-interested thing.
Ultimately.
I would rather that you were more competent. Now, if you're head-to-head in a competition with me, I might let resentment, allow me to desire your destruction. But all things considered, if you're competent, well, great, then you're going to offer me something. Okay, so we could agree perhaps that there is an element of the war on competence. That's the pathological end of this culture war that we're seeing. And we should also say that there's no doubt also a fair bit of attempts to rectify the terrible consequences of power-based inequality. Right? So the good is intermingled with the bad, but we have to pay attention to the bad. Then another question would be, and I don't know the answer to this at all, if we're seeing the rise of something like a war on competence, why are we seeing it? And why now?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Let's put it this way. I do not know of any evidence that it is our global enemies seeding this, but they could hardly have done better, right? Were they to try to get us to sabotage ourselves, they could hardly have done better than to get us to demonize our own competence and to sabotage our own children. I mean, the thing that I can't get over is, all right, if we woke up and came to our senses tomorrow, how long would it take for all of the nonsense to clear the system and for us to get back to the level of competence that we were headed towards? I mean, we're talking about, you know, the arguments have gotten particularly stupid in the last couple of years, but the overarching degradation of the system by those who didn't believe in competence in the first place goes back decades and has had a tremendous effect. And you know what? The bridges aren't falling down yet, not in large numbers, but that's by virtue of the fact that they were built by competent people, and they don't require, yearly maintenance. And this is going to catch up to us. It is time for us to return to our senses and get back to business right quick, or we are going to leave ourselves vulnerable to people who care so much less about freedom and about justice than we do.